On a crisp autumn morning in downtown Chicago, the number 47 bus rolled through its regular route, carrying its usual mix of commuters, students, and workers. Among them sat a young teenage boy, no more than 15, wearing his well-worn navy blue school uniform. Despite his young age, there was a quiet dignity in how he carried himself, always observing the world around him with thoughtful eyes. The bus made its scheduled stop near the shopping district, and an elderly woman slowly climbed aboard. Her clothes were clean but visibly worn, with careful patches sewn onto her faded dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she searched through her small coin purse, counting pennies and nickels with careful precision. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the bus driver, her voice quivering. "I think I'm $1 short." The woman's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as other passengers began to shift impatiently in their seats. The driver's face remained stern as he prepared to ask her to step off the bus. Without hesitation, the young boy stood up. He wasn't from a wealthy family himself, his uniform had been handed down from an older cousin, and his sneakers showed signs of careful repair. But something in the woman's eyes reminded him of his own grandmother, who had raised him with stories of kindness and dignity in the face of hardship. "Sir," he called out, his voice clear and respectful as he made his way to the front. "I'd like to pay for her fare." He pulled out his lunch money, 2 carefully folded dollar bills he had been saving for a special sandwich from the cafeteria. The other passengers watched in surprised silence as he handed the money to the driver. The elderly woman's eyes welled with tears, but before she could thank him, something remarkable happened. A businessman in a crisp suit stood up. "I'd like to reimburse the young man for his lunch money," he announced, "and pay for the next person who needs it too." He pulled out his wallet and handed the boy $5. This simple act of kindness sparked a chain reaction throughout the bus. A nurse in scrubs shared that she'd been having a rough morning, but this moment had changed her entire day. She too wanted to contribute to future passengers who might need help. As the bus continued its route, more passengers began sharing their own stories. A teacher mentioned how she kept extra lunch money for students who couldn't afford it. A construction worker recalled how a stranger's kindness had once helped him through a difficult time. The young boy listened to these stories with quiet amazement. He hadn't expected his small gesture to create such a ripple effect. The elderly woman now sat beside him, sharing stories of her own youth and how she used to help others in her community, even when she had very little herself. What started as a simple bus ride had transformed into something much more meaningful. The usually quiet morning commute had become a space where strangers connected through their shared humanity. People who normally buried themselves in their phones or avoided eye contact were now engaged in genuine conversation. By the time the boy reached his stop, several passengers had pooled together money for a "pay it forward" fund with the bus driver. They wanted to ensure that no one would have to experience the embarrassment of being unable to pay their fare. As he stepped off the bus, both the elderly woman and several other passengers made sure to get his name and asked about his school. They wanted to contact his principal to share how his simple act of kindness had sparked such a beautiful chain of events. The story didn't end there. By the afternoon, social media posts about the morning's events had started circulating. Local news channels picked up the story, not just focusing on the boy's initial act of kindness, but on how it had inspired an entire bus full of strangers to come together and create positive change in their community. The boy hadn't been seeking attention or praise. He had simply seen someone in need and done what he felt was right. But his action had reminded everyone on that bus of their own capacity for kindness and the power of standing up for others, regardless of their own circumstances. The next morning, the boy arrived at his high school just like any other day. He was surprised to find his principal waiting at the entrance, wearing a warm smile. News of his actions had spread throughout the community, and the school wanted to recognize his compassion. But what happened next would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others in their city. During the morning assembly, the principal shared the story with the entire school. As she spoke, Many students began to open up about their own experiences with hardship and kindness. One student revealed how she often skipped lunch because her single mother couldn't always afford to give her lunch money. Another mentioned seeing classmates pretend they weren't hungry when their lunch accounts were empty. The boys' simple act of kindness had unknowingly exposed a larger issue in their community. The school's guidance counselor stepped forward with tears in her eyes, sharing how many students faced similar challenges every day, too ashamed to ask for help. The cafeteria staff also spoke up, describing how they often quietly paid for students' lunches from their own pockets. What happened next showed the true power of community. The local business owner who had been on the bus the previous day arrived at the school during the assembly. He wasn't alone, he had brought together a group of small business owners from the neighborhood. Together, they proposed creating a dignity fund for the school, ensuring no student would ever have to choose between having lunch and keeping their pride. The elderly woman from the bus was there too, sitting quietly in the back of the assembly hall. When invited to speak, she slowly made her way to the front, her voice trembling with emotion. She shared her own story of growing up in poverty during the 1960s, and how small acts of kindness had given her the strength to keep going, eventually becoming a teacher herself before retiring. The local news crews that had gathered outside the school weren't just covering a heartwarming story anymore, they were witnessing the birth of a movement. The boys' act of kindness had created a ripple effect that was now transforming into a wave of positive change. Students from other schools began reaching out, wanting to start similar programs in their own communities. Social workers who had long struggled to address these issues found themselves suddenly flooded with offers of support from local businesses and community members who had never realized the extent of need in their own neighborhood. The boy's grandmother, who had raised him with stories of dignity and kindness, sat in the audience, tears streaming down her face. She remembered all the times they had struggled themselves, how she had taught him that true wealth wasn't in their pockets but in their hearts. Now she was watching as her grandson's simple act of compassion was blossoming into something far bigger than either of them had ever imagined. Local religious leaders and community organizers began working together, setting aside their differences to address the larger issues of poverty and dignity in their city. They shared stories of similar situations they'd encountered, elderly people choosing between bus fare and medicine, students missing school because they couldn't afford transportation, families walking miles to save bus fare for groceries. The boy remained quiet throughout all of this, somewhat overwhelmed by the attention but deeply moved by how his small gesture had unveiled these hidden struggles in his community. When asked to speak, he simply said, "I just did what my grandmother taught me, when you see someone in need, you help. We're all one community." By the end of that school day, something remarkable had happened. What started as a simple act of kindness on a city bus had transformed into a community-wide movement. The local transit authority announced they would be piloting a new program allowing passengers to donate to a fare assistance fund. The school board began discussing implementing similar dignity funds across all district schools. But perhaps most importantly, people were talking, really talking, about the invisible struggles many in their community faced daily. The shame and silence that had surrounded issues of poverty were being replaced by compassion and action. Students who had once hidden their circumstances were finding their voices, and those who could help were finally learning how. As word of the community's response spread, something unexpected happened. A famous tech entrepreneur who had grown up in the same neighborhood saw the viral news coverage. She remembered her own childhood struggles, walking miles to school because bus fare was too expensive, hiding from classmates during lunch to avoid explaining why she couldn't afford to eat. The story of the young boy's kindness struck a deep chord. Without any publicity or fanfare, she reached out to the school district. Instead of simply writing a check, she wanted to understand how to create lasting change. She spent a day riding the same bus route where the story began, talking to passengers, listening to their stories. She visited the school during lunch hour, sitting with students and hearing their experiences firsthand. What she discovered moved her deeply. Behind every story of hardship, there was also a story of resilience and hidden acts of kindness. The cafeteria worker who kept extra sandwiches in her bag for hungry students. The bus driver who sometimes let passengers ride free on particularly cold days. The school janitor who gathered discarded but still useful school supplies to quietly distribute to students in need. Meanwhile, the boy's grandmother had been receiving letters and calls from people across the city. Many were from elderly residents who shared similar experiences of struggling with transportation costs. Some wrote about grandchildren they couldn't visit because bus fare for the whole family was too expensive. Others described the isolation that came with being unable to afford regular trips to the grocery store or doctor's appointments. The young boy, still adjusting to his unexpected role in all of this, found himself thinking differently about his daily bus rides. He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before, the subtle signs of people counting coins, the worried looks when checking wallet contents, the relief on faces when enough fare was found. He realized that what he'd witnessed that morning wasn't unique, it was just one visible moment in an ocean of invisible struggles. The tech entrepreneur decided to approach the problem systematically. Working with community leaders and local officials, she developed a comprehensive program that went beyond just providing free bus passes. The initiative included job training programs at bus depots, teaching mechanical and administrative skills. It created part-time employment opportunities for students and seniors, allowing them to earn transit passes while contributing to their community. But the most innovative aspect came from an unexpected source, the elderly woman from the original bus ride. During a community meeting, she suggested creating dignity spots at bus stops, simple benches with small signs saying, "If you need a friend, sit here." The idea was to create safe spaces where people could connect and support each other without shame or judgment. The boys' school became a pilot site for several new programs. Students started a Walk and Talk initiative, where those who had to walk due to lack of bus fare could join walking groups, making the journey safer and more enjoyable. Others began organizing shared rides and carpools, creating networks of support that extended beyond just transportation needs. Local artists got involved too, painting murals at bus stops depicting scenes of community support and kindness. Each mural told a story, the boy helping the elderly woman, students walking together, neighbors supporting each other. These visual reminders helped normalize asking for and offering help, gradually shifting the community's culture. The grandmother's wisdom continued to guide much of the change. She reminded everyone that true dignity wasn't about receiving help, but about creating a community where helping each other was as natural as breathing. Her words resonated deeply: when we remove shame from needing help, we give everyone the freedom to be both strong and vulnerable. As winter approached, the impact of these changes became even more apparent. Bus drivers reported more passengers offering to pay for others' fares. Students were more open about their needs and more quick to offer support to classmates. The dignity spots at bus stops became gathering places where strangers became neighbors, sharing stories, resources, and hope. The young boy remained humble throughout it all, still taking the same bus route, still carrying his lunch money, still noticing when others might need help. But now he wasn't alone. His simple act of kindness had awakened something in his community, reminding everyone that the greatest changes often start with the smallest actions. As the story reached national news outlets, something unexpected began to happen in cities across the country. Communities started examining their own transportation systems and the hidden barriers that prevented people from accessing basic services. The ripple effect of one boy's kindness on a Chicago bus was inspiring similar movements nationwide. A group of high school students in Atlanta created a documentary about their own community's transportation challenges. They interviewed classmates who walked miles to school in all weather conditions, elderly neighbors who couldn't afford rides to medical appointments, and working parents who spent hours on multiple bus routes just to reach their jobs. The boy's grandmother received an invitation to speak at a national conference about community development. Despite her initial hesitation, she agreed, understanding that her grandson's story could help create change beyond their neighborhood. Her speech, delivered in her gentle but powerful way, brought tears to the eyes of hardened city planners and transit officials. Every morning, she told them, thousands of people in our cities face a choice between dignity and necessity. But it's not really a choice at all, is it? Because dignity should never come with a price tag. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had never considered how a simple bus fare could represent such a significant barrier in someone's life. Back in Chicago, the Tech Entrepreneurs Program was showing remarkable results. The Dignity Spots had evolved into community hubs, with local businesses providing free coffee and snacks. Senior citizens who had once felt isolated were now regular visitors, sharing stories and wisdom with younger generations. Students stopped by to do homework together, creating impromptu study groups that bridged social and economic divides. The boys' school had transformed as well. The cafeteria was now a place where students shared meals without shame or embarrassment. The Dignity Fund had grown beyond covering just lunch and bus fares. It now helped with school supplies, class trips, and even college application fees. Most importantly, asking for help had become normalized, seen as a sign of strength rather than weakness. One cold morning, a new student arrived at the school. She had recently moved to the city with her family and was struggling to adjust. Unable to afford the bus fare, she had walked 2 miles to school in the winter chill. When she arrived, shivering and discouraged, she found herself surrounded by supportive classmates who immediately included her in their walk and talk group. The original boy, now known throughout the school not for his viral moment of fame but for his consistent everyday kindness, was the first to welcome her. He shared his own story, not of the bus incident that made the news, but of the times he had struggled, the support he'd received, and the importance of passing that kindness forward. The Tech Entrepreneurs Initiative had begun partnering with local tech schools to develop a mobile app. The app connected people who needed rides with volunteers willing to help, coordinated walking groups, and helped users find the nearest Dignity Spots. It also included a feature where users could contribute to the Community Dignity Fund directly through their phones. Local businesses had started a program called Ride with Pride, offering job interviews to anyone who arrived by public transit. This simple initiative acknowledged the effort and determination it took for many people to navigate the city's transportation system while searching for employment. Several companies even began providing transit passes as part of their job offer packages. The elderly woman from the original bus ride had become a regular speaker at community events. Her gentle reminder that kindness sees no color, age, or wallet size became a motto for the movement. She often spoke about how that morning on the bus had restored her faith not just in humanity, but in the power of younger generations to create positive change. Winter turned to spring, and the community continued to evolve. The bus stops, once simply places to wait, had become symbols of hope and connection. The murals depicting scenes of community support had inspired similar art projects across the city. Each bus stop told a story, not just of transportation, but of transformation. The boy's grandmother often sat at these stops, watching the changing seasons and the changing city. She observed how people now naturally looked out for each other, how strangers had become neighbors, how simple acts of kindness had become woven into the fabric of daily life. She saw how her grandson's one small action had helped create a community where dignity wasn't just a word, but a living, breathing reality. As spring bloomed in the city, a prestigious university's sociology department began conducting a study on the community's transformation. Their research revealed something remarkable: crime rates had dropped significantly in areas surrounding the Dignity Spots. Emergency room visits for cold weather-related illnesses had decreased, particularly among elderly and low-income residents who previously had to walk long distances in harsh weather. The study caught the attention of a renowned documentary filmmaker who had grown up in similar circumstances. She spent weeks following different community members, capturing their stories through a lens of dignity and resilience. The boy's daily bus rides, the grandmother's wisdom, the elderly woman's continued involvement, all became threads in a larger tapestry of community transformation. One afternoon, while filming at a bustling Dignity spot, something extraordinary happened. A young mother with 2 small children was struggling with grocery bags, clearly exhausted from navigating public transit with her little ones. Without hesitation, 3 different people stepped forward to help: a high school student, a businessman, and an elderly gentleman. What was remarkable wasn't just the help offered, but how natural and expected it had become. The filmmaker captured this moment, but what happened next was even more powerful. The young mother, fighting back tears, shared her story. She was a nursing student, working part-time, raising her children alone. Before the community's transformation, she had often felt invisible, struggling silently. Now, she explained, she felt supported, seen, and capable of achieving her dreams. The boys' school had become a model for others across the country. Their Dignity Fund concept had evolved into a comprehensive support system. Students who once might have dropped out due to transportation or financial barriers were now staying in school, supported by a community that understood that education shouldn't depend on economic circumstances. The Tech Entrepreneurs app had expanded beyond its original scope. It now included features for skill sharing and community organizing. Senior citizens offered tutoring in exchange for help with groceries or yard work. Students provided tech support to older neighbors in return for life advice and stories of resilience. The app had become a digital platform for human connection. The original bus driver, who had witnessed the boys' first act of kindness, had his own story to tell. Over his 20 years of driving, he had seen countless passengers struggle with fares, watching helplessly as they were forced to choose between basic needs and transportation. Now, he described how his route had transformed into a mobile community, where passengers looked out for each other, shared resources, and built connections. One day, a group of international visitors came to study the community's transformation. They were amazed to find that the changes weren't just in programs and policies, but in the very fabric of daily life. They observed how people made eye contact, offered help without being asked, and treated each other with genuine respect regardless of their circumstances. The boys' grandmother hosted these visitors for dinner, serving them her famous sweet potato pie and sharing stories of the neighborhood's history. She explained how her grandson's action had been like dropping a pebble in a pond. The ripples had touched shores they never could have imagined. The elderly woman from the original bus ride had started a storytelling circle at her local Dignity spot. Every Wednesday afternoon, people gathered to share their experiences of struggle and triumph. These sessions became powerful reminders that everyone had a story worth telling and hearing, that dignity came not from what you had but from who you were. Local businesses reported an unexpected benefit: customer loyalty had increased significantly. People weren't just choosing where to shop based on prices, but on how businesses contributed to the community's well-being. The Ride with Pride program had expanded to include mentorship opportunities, connecting experienced professionals with job seekers who used public transit. The documentary filmmaker captured a particularly moving moment when a group of students from the boys' school organized a surprise celebration for their cafeteria workers. These staff members, who had quietly helped hungry students for years, were honored with a community dinner where students and parents shared stories of how this hidden kindness had impacted their lives. Through all of this, the boy remained grounded in his daily routine, riding the bus, attending school, helping where he could. His simple act of kindness had sparked a movement, but his ongoing, everyday compassion continued to inspire others. He often said that the most important lesson he'd learned was that change didn't require grand gestures or wealth, it just required the courage to see others' humanity and act accordingly. As summer approached, the community's transformation caught the attention of a major philanthropy foundation. Instead of simply offering funding, they wanted to understand how this organic movement had succeeded where many well-funded programs had failed. Their researchers spent months interviewing community members, trying to capture the essence of what made this change so sustainable. What they discovered was surprising yet simple: the success lay in how the movement had preserved human dignity at every step. Unlike traditional charity programs, this community had created a culture where giving and receiving help were equally honorable. The Foundation's report highlighted how the dignity spots had transformed from simple benches into spaces where social barriers dissolved and genuine connections formed. The young nursing student who had received help with her groceries had completed her degree and started working at a local clinic. She implemented a new program where medical staff would regularly visit dignity spots to provide basic health screenings and advice. This initiative helped many elderly and working poor residents access preventive care they might otherwise have missed. The boys' school district had noticed another unexpected outcome: attendance rates had improved significantly across all grades. When they investigated why, they found that the community's transportation support network had virtually eliminated tardiness and absences due to lack of bus fare. Moreover, students who might have previously skipped school due to hunger or shame now felt supported and welcome. One day, a retired teacher who had been following the community's story arrived from across the country. She had spent her career in a low-income school district and had always dreamed of creating similar changes. After spending a week observing the community's transformation, she returned home inspired to start her own movement, adapting what she'd learned to fit her community's unique needs. The documentary filmmaker's work was nearly complete, but she found herself struggling to end the story, because it kept growing in unexpected ways. She captured footage of small business owners offering job training at dignity spots, of students teaching computer skills to elderly neighbors, of community gardens sprouting up around bus stops where people could take fresh produce as needed. The Tech Entrepreneurs app had evolved into a national platform for community building. Other cities were using modified versions to address their own unique challenges. In some places, it connected people for carpooling; in others, it helped coordinate volunteer services for homebound seniors. The underlying principle remained the same: using technology to facilitate human connection and mutual support. The boy's grandmother had become something of a community philosopher. People would seek her out for advice, drawn by her gentle wisdom and practical approach to problem-solving. She would often say, "When you help others stand tall, you grow taller yourself." Her front porch became an unofficial meeting place where people from all walks of life would gather to share stories and seek guidance. The elderly woman from the original bus ride had started writing a book about her experiences. She wrote about how that morning on the bus had not just changed her life, but had shown her that society's biggest challenges could be addressed through small acts of kindness multiplied across communities. Publishers were interested, seeing how her story could inspire similar movements in other cities. Local government officials began studying the community's transformation as a model for policy change. They were particularly interested in how the movement had reduced demands on emergency services, improved public health outcomes, and strengthened community bonds, all while operating on a relatively small budget. The key, they realized, was that the community had created systems that empowered people to help each other rather than relying solely on institutional support. The original bus driver had been promoted to oversee the training of new drivers. He made sure that every new employee understood they weren't just operating vehicles, they were facilitating community connections. He would share the story of that fateful morning, emphasizing how a single act of kindness could cascade into unprecedented change. As summer bloomed in full, the community organized a festival celebrating their transformation. Streets were closed off, tables were set up for shared meals, and stages were erected for storytelling. People from all corners of the city came to learn about the movement and share their own experiences. The festival became a living demonstration of how breaking down barriers between people could create stronger, more resilient communities. Throughout the celebration, the boy and his grandmother sat quietly on their favorite bench, watching the joy unfold around them. They remembered the morning that had started it all, a simple decision to help someone in need, made without expectation of recognition or reward. Now, looking at their transformed community, they understood that the greatest changes often come not from grand plans or big budgets, but from small acts of kindness that remind people of their shared humanity. 1 year had passed since that morning on the bus. The documentary about the community's transformation was finally complete, and the premiere was scheduled at the local community center. People from all walks of life filled the space: students, business owners, elderly residents, city officials, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the movement. The boy sat between his grandmother and the elderly woman from the bus, their hands clasped together as they watched their story unfold on screen. The film captured not just the big moments of change, but the countless small acts of kindness that had become part of daily life: students helping elderly neighbors with groceries, business owners offering job training, community members sharing meals and stories at dignity spots. After the screening, a young girl raised her hand during the discussion. She asked the boy a simple question that made the room fall silent: "Weren't you scared that morning on the bus? Scared that people would laugh at you for helping?" The boy thought carefully before answering, his voice clear and steady. "I wasn't thinking about being scared," he replied. "I was thinking about my grandmother's words, that we're all part of the same human family. And in a family, you help each other without wondering what others might think." His grandmother squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. The city's mayor announced that the successful Dignity Spots program would be expanded to every neighborhood. But what made the announcement special was how it would be implemented, not through top-down planning, but through community involvement. Each neighborhood would adapt the program to meet its unique needs, ensuring that the spirit of grassroots change remained intact. The Tech Entrepreneurs app had evolved into something even more meaningful. It now included a feature where people could share their stories of giving and receiving help, creating a digital tapestry of community connection. These stories, shared anonymously, reminded everyone that vulnerability and strength often went hand in hand. The elderly woman's book was published, titled "The Morning That Changed Everything." In its pages, she detailed not just the story of that fateful bus ride, but the countless ripples of change that had followed. The book became a guide for other communities looking to create similar transformations, emphasizing that sustainable change comes from recognizing and preserving human dignity. The boys' school had become a model of community engagement. Other schools sent teachers and administrators to learn how they had created such a strong support network. The answer was always the same: by making everyone feel valued, by removing the shame from asking for help, and by creating opportunities for everyone to both give and receive support. The university researchers completed their study, documenting how the community's transformation had led to measurable improvements in public health, education, and economic opportunity. But their most significant finding was how the movement had changed people's sense of belonging and purpose. Residents reported feeling more connected, more capable, and more responsible for each other's well-being. On quiet mornings, the boys still rode the same bus route to school. The driver was different now, but the spirit of kindness remained. Passengers greeted each other warmly, shared stories, and looked out for one another. The simple act of paying a bus fare had transformed from a transaction into an opportunity for connection. The grandmother's front porch continued to be a gathering place for community wisdom. Young people would come seeking advice, elderly neighbors would share stories, and visitors from other cities would come to learn about the community's transformation. She would always remind them that change begins with seeing the dignity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. As the documentary spread to other cities, similar movements began taking root. Each community adapted the ideas to fit their unique needs, but the core principle remained the same: that by preserving human dignity and creating opportunities for mutual support, communities could transform themselves from within. The boy, now a year older and a bit taller, remained unchanged in the ways that mattered most. He still carried his lunch money carefully, still noticed when others might need help, and still believed in the power of small acts of kindness. His story had inspired thousands, but he knew that the real story wasn't about him. It was about how one small act of kindness could remind an entire community of their capacity to care for one another. The story continues to unfold, not just in this community but in countless others where people are rediscovering their connection to one another. It serves as a reminder that the biggest changes often start with the smallest actions, that every person has the power to create positive change, and that true transformation happens when we recognize and honor the dignity in every human being.